Hey everyone, and welcome to the first episode of our new podcast, Parallel Play. I'm Heather,
And I'm Ella.
and in this episode, we will be introducing ourselves, telling you a little bit about how we got to where we are and why we decided to make this podcast.
Okay, so I'm Ella. I am a recently graduated senior at Elon University. I double majored in psychology and film and television. And now I am doing an internship for a nonprofit organization called Cards to Warriors.
I'm Heather. I also recently graduated from Elon University. I majored in cinema and television arts with a minor in computer science, and I focused a lot on post production, video editing, coloring, that kind of stuff. I've actually just finished my first week at a full time job. I work as a video editor for a company in Virginia, and I edit like mini documentaries for medical legal court cases. So that's what I do as part of the forensics teams.
I was actually born with a couple of different chronic illnesses that I've had to work around with my entire life. So, one of them is a condition called spina bifida, which is a condition that affects the formation of the spinal cord. Basically, before I was born, my spinal cord didn't fully form the way that it should have, and that led to a lot of difficulties with things like walking, balance, everything that the spinal cord controls. And then the other condition that I have is called hydrocephalus. And that basically just means that I have a buildup of brain fluid in my head that cannot be regulated just by my own body.
So I am diagnosed with a type of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome called classical-like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome type 1, which basically it affects a gene called TNXB and means I'm missing the protein that that gene codes for. I also have a lot of conditions that are associated with it that include things like POTS, gastroparesis, I have neuropathy, I have sleep apnea, and I have a bunch of other things too that are structural issues and like malformations and that kind of stuff. As a kid, I had very, very severe mental illness. I was diagnosed with ADHD at, I think it was 4 or 5. I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder at 6, and then bipolar disorder with psychotic features at 12 after a pretty long stay in the mental hospital from psychosis and hallucinations and that kind of stuff.
I also have some different mental health issues, one of which was GAD, and that mainly affects me with like auditory triggers. So a lot of my anxiety is caused by sudden loud noises. And then the newest diagnosis that I got, it's actually still a work in progress. I don't have a full diagnosis yet, but I'm in the process of looking into getting a diagnosis for autism. That's been kind of more prevalent in my life lately, and that's something that I've been talking with a therapist about.
So, like we said, we both majored in cinema and television arts at Elon University, and there was a required class that we had to take called Entertainment, Media, and Society, and that's where we met. So it was my freshman year. Ella, you were a sophomore? Or yes. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was the J term of our first semester, so I like to sit in the front of the class. And so I was sitting very front and center, and our professor basically said like, "Hey, can you move to the seat next to you because we have a student in a wheelchair that's coming?" And I was like, "Cool. Yeah, I can do that." Little did I know the person in the wheelchair was gonna become my best friend in the whole world. Entertainment, Media, and Society was a class about diversity in media representation. And so it covered things like race and gender, ethnicity, but it also, we had a session on disability and mental health. And I remember that lesson, it was a good lesson, but we didn't feel like it went as much in depth as we would have really liked. And so the two of us ended up talking afterwards. We walked back to our buildings together, and we ended up talking afterwards in a much more in-depth conversation about this. And we realized, like, our stories, even though very different, we have things in common.
We were actually living in the same area on campus. You were moving into the same area on campus where I had been living
And I don't
already.
think I had any friends at the time there.
Probably not. Yeah.
'Cause I had been in a different living situation, and it just wasn't the best, it wasn't a great environment, and so I decided to move in with my friend Sam, and she ended up not doing the J term, and she was kinda my only person there, so I was all alone in my little thing, and so then I met Ella, and I was not all alone anymore.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember how long did we end up, like, talking that first day, like, when we were just launching into that
Oh,
discussion about,
hours.
um it was my from my memory, it was quite a lengthy discussion as most of our discussions end up being.
That is about right. The first memorable thing that I think we talked about was the school system, if I remember correctly, was one of the things that we talked about the most, was kind of the injustices the 2 of us had faced there. And, our challenges growing up were very different, but we still had some of the same issues with the public school system, and that was really interesting. Not interesting in a good way exactly, but we talked a lot about the mistreatment that the 2 of us had faced, and I think we're both very open people, like, if you for the most part, if you ask us a question, we'll answer it. And we also are both oversharers. When we first meet somebody, that works
Yeah.
very well.
And it's really, like, for me at least, it's really helpful, like, when I have somebody else who is also like that or who's actually interested in that because, like, there's not a whole lot of people, even if they don't mind like, even if they enjoy hearing about somebody's life, there's not a whole lot of people that would be interested in that level of detail,
Yeah.
um, about somebody's life, and so, like, for me at least, it's always nice when I find somebody who is actually interested in that level of detail. I think it's also fun to mention, that we had actually met prior to that class at the beginning of the year. This was, sort of around the halfway point through the year, and we had actually met at the beginning of the year, and neither of us remembered
So
until actually, I think the year later. The school has, like, an event where all the different student organizations can get together and, um, give out information to new students who might be interested in joining the organizations, and so I had had a table for an organization that I was trying to start that was actually supposed to be an advocacy and support group for students with disabilities, and Heather had come by our table and signed up to be on the contact list and everything, and I had completely forgotten about that when we started talking, like, during this class that we had together, and it wasn't until, like, a year into our friendship that we remembered.
yeah, you had said something about the words of the organization, and I was like, "Wait a second, like, I signed up for that." You're like, "No, you didn't. That's not possible." And I think you, like, found the actual sign-up sheet from it.
Yeah,
My name was on there. We're in a very, like, media-driven society right now, and we're in a time where a lot of voices are getting silenced online, and I know personally, I don't want disabled voices, especially female disabled voices, to go away.
I feel like it's important to sort of shed light on experiences that are different from that majority.
We've both grown up in very unique situations, and we still continue to live very unique situations, and I kinda wanna destigmatize a lot of the things. I feel like mental health, especially things like psychosis, and a lot of the things I've experienced are very, very stigmatized right now. And also, so are things like autism, which you experience. EDS is very stigmatized right now in the media. I hope we can make people feel more confident in their disabilities and hopefully bring other people into the community that's helped us so much. And through this, we're going to cover our personal experiences. We're going to cover things like what our conditions, how they affect our life, things about family, things about friends, things about the public school system, things about college, higher education, that kind of stuff. And we're going to cover it all because the 2 of us have been through a lot. And I know a lot of people who are watching this podcast probably have too.
And I also wanna say too, like, for people who have clicked on this podcast, who maybe don't necessarily have that same background, for people who have clicked on it just out of curiosity, we hope that this is gonna be the sort of thing that's gonna be enlightening and enjoyable for you to learn from as well.
I hope that we can build community here on this little podcast that we're making. Thank you for tuning in to our first episode of Parallel Play, and I hope to see you guys back next week.